Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Trial Site News interview. I'm your host, Brandon. Today, we'll be talking again to Dr. David Wiseman and Daniel O'Connor. Dr. Wiseman is a PhD Bioscientist with a background in pharmacy, pharmacology, and immunology, and experimental pathology. Since 1996, he's run his own medical product R&D consulting business, and since 2020, he has focused on COVID-19. He has made over 28 submissions on COVID-19 vaccines to government bodies, including the FDA, CDC, and NIH. He's a contributor to TrialSiteNews and also participated in Senator Ron Johnson's 2 expert panels in 2022. Daniel O'Connor is the founder of TrialSiteNews and recently spoke at the rally to reclaim free speech on the steps of the United States Supreme Court. Today's discussion will focus on the June 5th meeting of the FDA's Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee. From the FDA's own website, it states the committee will meet in open session to discuss and make recommendations on the selection of the 2024 and 2025 formula for COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Wiseman gave remarks supported with slides during the public comment period portion of this meeting. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello, good afternoon.
Dr. Wiseman, tell us about the FDA meeting yesterday. From the YouTube stream, including breaks, it lasted about 7 hours. What is your summary of the meeting?
The purpose of the meeting was to determine whether or not to recommend a new strain, a variation of the COVID-19 vaccines. This is now the 3rd time that's been done. We had the original strain, then we went to the bivalent BA.5 original. Then we went to XBB last September, and now with variants evolution, the discussion was whether to recommend that the manufacturers produce a new strain vaccine, and if so, which one. So that was it. And then so the committee did actually vote, and basically followed the WHO meeting recommendation from about 6 weeks ago, that they recommended that the manufacturers make a JN1 version. What exactly that's going to mean, it's still not clear. FDA has to formally sort of ask the manufacturers to do whatever they want to do, but there was a lot of discussion whether it should be JN1 specifically, or one of the even more recent variants, subvariants of those, KP2 and KP3 being the main ones. So that was really the discussion. That was a discussion.
Well, again, Dr. Wiseman, it's an honor to have you here. On that topic, I know you were actually on the calendar there to speak, and so it would be really nice to just get a summary of A, what you had to say, B, what kind of impact it had, and C, is there any takeaway from your contribution to this latest VRBPAC meeting?
Okay, well, so I registered to speak as a public speaking session person, and they gave us about 10 of us. They gave us full 4 minutes, which is increased from the 3 minutes that has been allotted previously. I focused on, I'm just going to zip back to my slides. I'm just not going to go through every single one of them, but go through the front one and the back one really, and talking about the uptick in cancers in the COVID era. And you know that there's been a lot of talk about this, even in the Washington Post today, I think, or yesterday, that the COVID era cancers has upticked. Again, without going into the details, we talked about my testimony at the Texas Senate committee meeting a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot of the similar things that I presented from there. You can look it up on TrialSiteNews. So I presented that data, and the thing that I pointed out, which was different from the Texas Senate, and was, first of all, what was the same was to say, look, we cannot exclude as a possibility the effect of the virus or the effect of the vaccines on this cancer uptake if it's real. So we have to investigate it. What I pointed out to the committee and made it very clear was that Peter Marks testified to the House Representatives Committee in February, holding a hearing on vaccine safety systems, and he stated, and it's written on the top of the slide here, we have not detected any increase in cancers with the COVID-19 vaccines. And I wanted to make it very clear that that was an inaccurate statement, because CDC had, by July 2022, detected, at least in signals. A signal does not prove causality, but a signal says there's something going on here. Look at it. And this is the slide here, which I showed earlier in Texas, and showing that there's signals for 16 cancer types in the VAERS in this particular signal analysis that CDC did. Okay, so Dr. Marks, FDA are giving inaccurate information to Congress. There was signals, they have to be investigated. So that was the thrust of what I had to say, and of course I brought in other information, which I'm not going to go into in detail unless you want me to. But to really, the big one that I also talked about was the frame shifting issue, which we've talked about before, the production of these aberrant proteins that are uncontrolled and uncharacterized. That's a huge issue. I talked about the DNA contamination issue that we've talked about before. Yes. And then concluding with this slide to say, look, this needs to be investigated. And if we use the terminology of FDA's EUA evidentiary standard and apply the same standard, really, we can say, based on the totality of scientific evidence, these are the words of the EUA sort of regulations guidelines, including data from adequate and well-controlled trials if available, it is reasonable to believe that the product may be, and we've changed one word, unsafe. So I think that's a very reasonable conclusion that we can draw on everything we talked about. So that was my contribution.
So if I could just summarize,
the outcome was I got a resounding. Peter Marks called me, Robert Caleb called me, Anthony Fauci called me, and you're lucky to have me on your show right now. I've been fielding phone calls all morning from those guys.
Yeah,
they just wouldn't let me alone.
We're blessed that all the media is calling you now, that they all have agreed now. But on that note, so there's three major issues that you bring up. You bring up an increased cancer signal, and we've seen a few studies that show this. There's a term called turbo cancer that's being thrown around.
Right, we've talked about that.
That's not a term that the medical establishment acknowledges, just so everybody knows.
Right.
There's actually a medical term for that. I can't remember what it is right now, but turbo cancer is not it. Now, there's no conclusive proof that COVID nor COVID vaccines, have any association with cancer. We just see some signals. However,
the point is that again in the data that we've shown, we showed it on the last interview. There is an uptake in cancers. There's no question about it. And this article in the Washington Post, today, this is their headline: unusual cancers emerged after pandemic. Doctors ask if COVID is to blame. Okay, so people are asking the question, at least regarding COVID, and there are plausible mechanisms for the COVID virus, but some of those mechanisms and others could apply plausibly to the vaccine itself. So this is being talked about, that there is an increase in cancers or cancer mortality, however you want to call it. I don't think that's up for grabs anymore.
No, there's even a couple legitimate peer review papers that talk about a disturbing increase in cancers. But again, these are at the very forefront. Now, the question I have for you first, so the cancers, the frame shifting, and the DNA, these are three pretty heavy duty topics.
They are.
This isn't light material, going into your medicinal product, your vaccine. Right. With that being in mind, what was the response?
Well, first of all, zero. But I would couch that in general, saying that whenever the FDA or CDC for that matter has these public have their meetings, and there's a session inviting the public to speak for three or 4 minutes or whatever, and they go through a list of 5-10 people, there's never someone on the committee never says, oh, stop there, Dr. Wiseman, can I ask you a question about so and so? It's extremely rare that someone will even comment on it one way or the other. I mean, there might be some comment, like there was some comments about the availability of vaccines for more than once a year for people who feel that they're at risk. And so that sort of was addressed a little bit, but again, it's very rare for the committee really to even address very much. I think the most animated anyone ever got was about 2 years ago when someone made some remarks that were interpreted as hate speech, and there was quite I think that might have been an ACIP meeting, and I think there was another time when Steve Kirsch got asked to tone it down. There was another occasion. Might have been an ACIP meeting, not an FDA meeting. But anyway, but again, in general, there's rarely, doesn't matter who's speaking, doesn't matter what they're saying, there's rarely comment or from the committee
or any feedback. Okay, so we got on the record that there are these 3 general observations that are troubling. There's no doubt. Now, with that in mind, a couple other points about this meeting I wanted to get on the table. One would be the variant. Now, obviously, the current variant today, JN1, is going away, and what they call the flirt variants are emerging.
Right.
And that's KP2, and there's some other ones.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. KP2 and 3 are the main ones.
Is the premise that, if the pharmaceutical companies formulate 2 JN1, that would be more than sufficient to cover these offshoots?
Right. So that again, the term that has come about in the past was, we don't want to be chasing variants. Okay. Right. And so I don't know what this is if it's not chasing variants, but it is chasing variants. I don't know why it's not that, but we have to call it what it is. Okay. And the WHO had their advisory group about 6 weeks ago. Of course, things were very, somewhat different 6 weeks ago, but they recommended a JN1 monovalent vaccine. Right. And so to sort of answer your question, there were 2 slides I'm going to show you now. These are from, I think, the CDC presentation at yesterday's meeting. And these colors represent the sort of, the x-axis, the horizontal axis is time going from January 2022 to May 2023 in this case, and it's looking at the rise and fall of different variants at that time. And so if you recall, the meeting a year ago, roughly June 2023, was to discuss which variant we should use. Okay, and it was going from the BA.5 bivalent to the XBB. So in this big block of sort of turquoise color in the middle here, that's BA.5. So that's the B. Remember, that was the main composition, the main new variant in the bivalent. So if you look at here, it's starting to creep up around about September 2022. It's going up and up and up and up, right? It was already going up in May 2022, right? But by about January 2023, there's not very much of it left, and by February or so, it's hardly there at all. So remember, that bivalent was introduced, I think, at the end of September, if I recall, of 2022. So basically, from October, November, December, there was some of it around. It largely gone away, right? And it started to be replaced by these other things, and the main one being this big blue mass of these XBB ones, which was starting to come in December 2022 and take over. So basically, there was about a 3-month window where there was enough of it around that it made a difference. Now, it might have made a difference, but again, assuming there might be some cross reactivity of the bivalent to XBB, which there was, but a much reduced rate. But anyway, I just want you to see what the timeline is, and then so that's when the transition from the BA5 to the XBB. Now I'm going to look at the same sort of graph, but now a year later. So now we're going from June 2023, right, to basically now. Okay,
David, can I stop you for 1 minute?
Yeah.
One thing that's very apparent, and we just wrote about this, is
Yeah.
the life cycle of the mutated subvariants is speeding up. Very much so. Look at that.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, there's some debate. Okay, let's assume it's the same, just for the purposes of right now. But it could be. But even if it's the same, okay. Look. So this was now. So let's look at the decision a year ago. Again, last June, the decision was, tell Pfizer and Moderna and Novavax to make XBB 1.5. So already by June, a year ago, the XBB was starting to wane by June. They didn't come up with the vaccine until September, which is over here, right? And so you see that it's almost, it's still around a bit. There's some other XBB things which were sort of XBB-like, okay? But it was basically by about December, January, XBB was gone, but January 2024, the JN1 were already taking over, okay? And there is significant immune evasion from the JN1 to XBB to JN1 because they are very different lineages. One was a BA5, one was a BA2 lineage. But so the question is, okay, now what do we do? So now we're at the end of this graph here, and we're at April, May, June, right? If the speed is the same, okay, if it's going faster, then it's even worse. But like you said, but if it's the same, then by the time these new vaccines are going to be available, let's say September, JN1 is going to be pretty much done or on its way out. KP2 and KP3, which are sublineages of JN1, right, will be should be probably high, okay, but probably by again January, February, or sooner, those will be on their way out, right? And we don't know what will replace them. So the question is that given that these KP2 and KP3 are similar, but they could go off in completely different directions, the committee was in a quandary as to, well, what do we are they so similar to JN1 that let's recommend JN1, or let's pick one of these? And a bivalent was not on the table. Okay, so that was the quandary, and the committee didn't really understand the question at first. Are we voting for JN1, or are we voting for KP2, or are the manufacturers going to make up their own mind? What's going to happen? So there was a lot of discussion about that. But I think the way it came out, and FDA have yet to issue their formal sort of request to the manufacturers, but the way it seems like it's going to come out is that they are going to go with the trunk of the tree, as someone call it, and recommend the JN1, right, and specifically JN1, right, and not one of the KP2 or KP3. But you can see the timeline is again very similar or worse if you accept that the things are mutating faster than before. So
I'd like to just chime in here for a minute. So again, keep things focused. So I think the big question is because KP2 and I think it's KP3 and there's a couple others, it's true that there's an overlap, but it's also true that they have some mutations that are different.
Yeah, they are mutations, but they are fairly similar to JN1, but they are certainly mutations. But it's not the same big jump that it is from XBB to JN1.
Right. Understood. So I think the key question, I think this discussion leads us to the very point you started. They didn't want to chase variants, but that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, so all the other stuff aside, and whether these vaccines are a good idea for lots of other reasons. Okay, let's say this was influenza, right? And we all agreed, it's a good idea to have influenza, vaccines available, the new seasons and whatever. Okay, then I mean you are chasing variants. I mean I don't, is it a bad term inherently? I'm not sure it's a good or bad term. It sort of sounds a bit, what is it? Is it a pejorative term? I don't know. It sounds like you're chasing dreams, you're chasing rainbows, you're chasing ambulances, whatever. It has a bad connotation. I mean, the sort of bad connotation is that this it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that we're always going to be chasing after a new thing. Whereas, is there a better approach to try and tackle these diseases in a different way and assess, is there a risk? Are there other ways of dealing with these diseases other than through vaccination? And I think that's the issue.
There's in the pipelines there are mucosal, intranasal, mucosal vaccines. There are pan coronavirus vaccines. These blood-based vaccines are limited. They seem to be better earlier on for the earlier variants that were more virulent, and they also had lower respiratory infection versus upper respiratory. So
right.
I think the game has changed, the situation's different. This is quite helpful. I want to just change the topic for a minute because again I want to cover things that maybe no other media or the FDA
yeah, okay, go ahead. Yeah,
are covering. And so on back to the safety signal. I think there's this big concerted push to just box in the safety signal to myocarditis and anaphylaxis. Now, and cancer aside, I mean, I think this is controversial that Marx is saying that nothing has changed. Okay, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So we talked about the cancer specifically, which was the focus of my particular remarks. So what I'm going to show you now is some slides which I've just sort of cobbled together from other presentations and a couple of new things that have just come up very recently. So this is the YouTube transcript, and I have edited it a little bit. It's not exactly perfect, but it's the YouTube thing. So there has not many times at either FDA, VRBPAC, or the CDC ACIP meeting, there is a presentation on efficacy, when there was indeed one yesterday. Dr. Link Gellis, who seems a very competent statistician or epidemiologist, whatever she is, she gives a very straight account of the efficacy data, and she did so yesterday. So that's a normal feature of these types of meetings. What is also a fairly normal feature of these meetings is a similar presentation by someone, either FDA or CDC or the VSD person, who's Dr. Nicola Klein, who's not an FDA CDC person, but in various configurations, there's been a safety update. We looked at VAERS, we looked at VSD, and so on. This is what we found. This is what we didn't find. Okay, no safety talk yesterday, and as far as I can tell, there hasn't been. There was only one meeting. 2 meetings last year. I don't think there's only been any FDA VRBPAC meetings this year other than yesterday, and there were two last year. So last June, similar meeting to this one, no safety presentation. There was one in January. Okay, so Dr. Gans, who is on the committee, said quite rightly, listen, even if nothing changed, we still want to hear a presentation about what we looked at and so on, because it's a finding if you indeed find there's nothing there. So I want to read you, and someone can listen to the exact thing if they want to, but Dr. Marks was asked to comment on the safety things, and basically, just if you focus on the last red words over there, I put in red. There were no safety concerns with this year's vaccines. Okay, and we heard some similar comments from Moderna, similar comments from Pfizer, but this is the director of CBER telling the committee, really, there's nothing going on here. Well, I don't think that's exact. Aside from the issue that you should be talking about safety every time, which Dr. Gans correctly says, Okay, let's look at what exactly he's saying. There's no new safety concerns. Okay, so I think we talked about this before, but I'm going to show you this slide from, or set of information from the presentation at last year's September ACIP, the CDC meeting, where Dr. Nicola Klein, who is the sort of principal investigator for the VSD, revealed for the first time that there were signals that they had identified for myocardial infarction and venous thromboembolism. And if you recall, we talked about that. And just to remind you, this was the table she put up, and showing with a date of May 2022 that there were signals that were identified for heart attack and venous blood clotting. Okay, and you recall that we looked at the meetings that took place before that and after that, the same presentation, basically the same format, and those signals had not been reported at all. This was the first time in September 2023 they reported. There's an FDA presentation somewhat similar in January 2023, looking at a CMS database, I think, not the same database as the VSD, and again, but with a similar type of format, only showing potential signal for stroke, but the heart attack at the top there and thromboembolism, which is somewhere over here. I can't see it really quickly. Pulmonary embolism, okay, not quite the same, but similar. Oh, deep vein thrombosis. No signals. So they're not. So how come none of this has been talked about at any of these meetings? It gets worse, because there was a paper that got put out in April, just a couple of months ago, and this was authored by who's who of FDA and CDC people. You've got
we saw this. Yes,
you saw this, right? Yeah. And in the paper they're saying when they looked at the VSD system, they detected these heart attack and thromboembolism signals, like Dr. Klein said in the September meeting. But now it's in a journal, okay, right? And they say in this particular paper, which was the sort of name of the paper, the title of the paper. Let me make it a bit smaller so you can see it. The title of the paper was Overview of U.S. COVID Vaccine Safety Surveillance Systems. And they say that the COVID vaccine safety data were regularly presented to ACIP and the VRBPAC meeting, right? They're we did a great job. We're letting everyone know about this, and we're doing it on a regular basis. Okay, right. That's what they're saying, right? And not only that, we publish it, we put it in preprint servers, we put it on in different places, right? That's what they're saying. But in this paper that came out in April, there was a signal which they hadn't told the committee about. Okay, in the CMS data consistent with the FDA presentation, they didn't find it. But the point is, there's a signal there, and they have to be discussing it, right? And then to remind you that we, going back 3 years now nearly, we saw signals for heart attack and thromboembolic things, in our analysis of theirs. That's an aside. But here's another place. So again, the big question that we need to ask is are the members of VRBPAC or ACIP being told on a timely basis about signals, whether or not the signal eventually turns out to be just a blip and a statistical aberration, or whether it turns out to be something. Okay, they are not being told about these things at the exact places where they should be told. Okay, and now we've caught them on cancer, we've caught them on this heart attack and the thromboembolism. All right, and here's another paper. This is again an FDA authored paper, came out in February. All right, February. All right, they've got signals. Some of them we've heard about before. Okay, Bell's palsy, pulmonary embolism signals. Okay, there's signals. They're not talking about this at these meetings. That's exactly what they should be talking about. And look at the dates. The dates were of the study was through early 2022, and the paper didn't come out until February 2024. Right. Yeah. So they're sitting on these things. Okay. Here's another one. Look at this. This is FDA. Now look at the date here. This is really significant, and you'll see why in a moment. October the 15th, 2023. Again, This is a preprint server. By the way, I just want to make a point about preprints. You know, about peer review, blah blah blah, and if it's in a preprint server, it doesn't count. You know, first of all, they're putting this stuff on preprint servers, which is fine. Number one. Number two, when you look at the presentations yesterday, particularly the one from Dr. Weir from FDA, he was quoting preprint papers all the time, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so don't give me this nonsense. Oh well, you know, it's a preprint, it's not blah blah blah. You know, when it's convenient for FDA to cite a preprint, they will do so.
Well, right? Here's the concern that we have. This is enough. We have quite a substantial amount of evidence of safety issues. We have Peter Marks, who oversees the vaccine division of the FDA, declaring there's no new safety signals.
Well, he may be right. There's no new safety signals because these things existed 2 years ago. We just didn't tell anyone.
They're not acknowledging them. So this is a form of disinformation. Okay, misinformation is when you don't know what you don't know and you're just espousing something and it's wrong. Disinformation is when you're specifically directing people in a certain pathway and it's not the full picture. And the problem is, again, we keep raising this issue that it's people's safety. There are problems. We have seen injuries. We know that they're real. I still call them rare but real, but they're real. So with that in mind, you know, these meetings are supposed to be a place where these types of issues are talked about. What are some things that we can do to raise awareness of this so that perhaps there's other pathways to implement policy?
Well, I mean, you know, I'd be interested in speaking to Dr. Gantz because I mean, she's asking a very legitimate question, and whether or not she and I agree, you know, about the safety or not of the safety of vaccines, you know, I think we would certainly agree that these issues need to be discussed, right? And someone like a Dr. Gantz, who you know was quite insistent, as she should be, right? You know, and Dr. Marks in response said, yes, you know, we will at future meetings make sure we have, you know, someone talking about safety, blah blah blah. Okay, but they've got to really get into the nitty gritty and see what they've done. And again, Daniel, you got to see this because this is October the 15th, 2023. You'll see why that date's important. Yeah, it's in medRxiv preprint server. These are FDA people, right? This is talking about, if you look over here, the new signal detected for seizures and convulsions. This is
we wrote about that.
But look what happened. Look what happened. It finally got into print in JAMA in April. In the print version, right, at the end of the abstract, they added the green words. You know, okay, so they said there was a new signal for seizures, convulsions, blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, they added the U.S. Food and Drug Administration conclude that the known and potential benefits of COVID outweigh the known potential risks of COVID-19 infection. Okay, so look what they're really bending over backwards. Okay, we found the signal. It doesn't look great, but guess what? Everything's still good. I mean, you know, it's incongruous to talk about a signal, right, which hasn't been, you know, finalized. You know, the signal is not a signal, and then say, and still they're safe and effective. Well, the two things are incongruous.
Here's the problem. The problem is that, you know, the safe and effective mantra and the algorithm behind that mantra is a black box. They're not exposing that to us. You know, we did a survey. You'll appreciate this, Dr. Wiseman, and we looked at COVID vaccination policies for much of the wealthy, developed Western world plus Japan.
Right.
The United States is the only country that is implementing a COVID-19 vaccine for children under 5. The only country in the West that we could find. Okay, so there's a rigidity in all of this that they're not opening it up, they're not segmenting, they're not taking a more real world approach to what risks and benefits are. Given that the virus has gotten more mild, given that there is more almost universal exposure, hybrid immunity in many cases, there's still this impetus behind the policy to push vaccinations, needles and arms.
Right.
That pandemic era ethos is still operating. We're out of the emergency. There is no more emergency. Okay. So this is a perplexing situation that you present to us today. Okay. It's very
Right.
So is there anything else, again, just to be mindful of time, is there anything else that you think high level we should address in this?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's more of the same of what I've showed you. Other papers that and October. I just want to show you why October the 15th is important because this National Academies report, which was commissioned by the HRSA, one of the other agencies in the HHS, to look at evidence review. It was a really flawed review, and look at what's going on. They only considered published data from the peer-reviewed literature to October the 17th. And October the 15th, I showed you a couple of papers. There were 3 that were put in the preprint literature. 1 or 2 did make it eventually, but none of those made it into the into this review. And there were other flaws in the review. So that was one issue. The second issue is that you've got a series of papers from the Cleveland Clinic, and I think we've talked about them before. This was from a year ago.
Right.
Adults not up to date with the CDC definition have a lower risk of COVID than the ones who are up to date. And again, they put a sort of a more recent version of that, sort of work in March, basically increased risk, with the number of vaccine doses previously received. So they're reporting the Pfizer will report, oh, we had good efficacy, but they only report efficacy to 60 days. And they're not really reporting it longer than that. The CDC, at least in Dr. Link Gellis's work, she is showing, waning, and sometimes the waning does go to 0 or negative, and so it's there, but they're not really pointing it out. Right? And that's a huge problem. It's not just that these things don't work very well; they could become negative efficacy, and the whole thing is a self-repeating cycle.
I agree. And so we have one more topic I want to touch on, then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
I appreciate it. We're putting it on the record that there are safety issues still that
I would give Dr. Gantz a call. See if she'd comment. I'd like to see.
We'll try to reach out. There's potentially efficacy issues per Cleveland Clinic. Now, the last point I want to touch upon is, Sanofi, we wrote about this, Sanofi invested $1.2 billion in a vaccine deal with Novavax. That's a protein-based vaccine. The FDA was pretty gung-ho about the protein-based vaccine this go-round. They said it's important to have that class of vaccine. They're starting to acknowledge some issues with mRNA. Real quickly, Dr. Wiseman, at TrialSite, we've been meticulously following scientific literature. Buried in this literature are arguments and debates and disclosures that mRNA is not quite prime time. It's very clear. We even have one study from 4X Moderna scientists. Now, there seems to be a shift. A big player like Sanofi, when they make an announcement like this in $1.2 billion, and it's not an mRNA vaccine, it's a protein-based vaccine. The FDA sort of had some hints. It seems to us that the FDA, the industry is warming up back to protein-based vaccines because of some of the issues with mRNA. Any comments on that? Too early? Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, it might be a little too early. I think, and Sanofi have made no investments in mRNA, to your knowledge.
I believe they have too. I do believe they have, but this is the most recent investment and the largest investment by far is this protein-based vaccine investment.
Okay. Well, I mean, look. First of all, any company, any technology, it's a prudent thing to diversify your portfolio and so on. So, not to bet on one particular horse. So that's, sounds like in general, not an unreasonable, decision. Whether or not it's signaling exactly what you're talking about, I don't know. But again, the Novavax has, in general, I think an interesting technology. And again, not to delve into, is it a good idea to produce spike protein, and is that causing some problems of its own? What's the correct target antigen? Okay, let's ignore that. But but they've got this novel, this novel sort of compound that packages the antigen and delivers it in some way. So there might be some novelty there. I think the scientists, my impression of they're pretty good scientists and they've done a pretty good job. I think FDA was dragging their heels with Novavax, and I think they everything else aside, they at least deserve a bigger place at the table than they've been given. But whether or not that technology turns out eventually to be highly useful, I don't know. But again, just ignoring all the safety things, all the DNA things, everything else, I think the technology looks like an interesting technology of their delivery vehicle or delivery mode, adjuvant, whatever they're calling it. And that's what Sanofi might be doing. Doesn't Sanofi have other kinds of vaccines that the traditional vaccines as well that it produces?
Yeah, they do.
So it might be they want to say, look, we're not ready to, and I don't know what they make. Let's say they make measles or influenza, or I don't know what they make, but they might be saying, well, that might be an interesting platform for the sort of vaccines that you don't, that don't really change. They're not mutating like flu and COVID, where wouldn't it be nice to produce a vaccine in 60 days? So they might say, well, this might have advantages over the traditional vaccines, so that the adjuvant action is better. It might solve some of the old potential problems with classical adjuvants. So that might be behind their decision. So I don't know what's behind their decision, but I think you certainly, it's not a bad question that you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, with the spike protein in the Novavax protein-based vaccine, exactly how much spike protein the payload is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, sure.
With the mRNA vaccine, your body becomes the molecular manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really, and plus the frame shift issue.
Yeah.
So,
we just don't know. We don't know yet. It's not fully controlled. But look, this is always a pleasure. We're grateful that you take the time to attend these meetings. You've done this since the start of the pandemic. We're trying to, make sure we're monitoring these agencies, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's representing the people and our safety. So we're grateful to you, Dr. Wiseman. We're going to publish this. We'll do an article, publish the video. Send it around on social media so that other people can, listen if they enjoy this kind of discussion. Right. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And I did post I might post my slides on TrialSite yesterday, and that you can link to that, and there's a tweet as well, and it links to the exact spot where I was giving my remarks.
Dr. Wiseman, just to wrap up really quickly, as Daniel mentioned there, you've been very busy in the Texas Senate hearings and in speaking at the U.S. FDA meetings. Is there anything else on your radar coming up in the near future? I wish you could...
Yeah, there's lots, but I can't necessarily go into details about it. Yeah, but there's some exciting stuff. Stay tuned.
Sounds good. We know there'll be more things coming in the future.
On your dial.
Sounds great. Dr. David Wiseman and Daniel O'Connor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And for unbiased news and opinion articles and the latest in scientific research, please visit TrialSiteNews.com. Also follow us on X, Rumble, and YouTube.